So you want to know how to solder? Well, you've come to the right place. Whether you're just curious about the topic or actually need to fix electrical components, I will teach you the very basics of soldering. I feel qualified to teach you soldering as I am currently a freshman at Purdue University studying engineering. Additionally, I've had much experience soldering, including building my own FPV racing quadcopter, soldering for my high school senior engineering project, and soldering during a summer internship at Kirby Risk, a local electronic manufacturing company. Before I get ahead of myself, what exactly is soldering? Well, soldering is the process of melting metal onto electric components to form an electric connection and to hold all of the components in place. This is done with the use of a soldering iron, which heats up the components enough to melt the solder, which is the binding metal. Soldering can also be used to fuse two wires together. This is actually what I will be teaching you in this tutorial, as this is the most basic yet useful form of soldering. In this tutorial, I will teach you how to connect two severed wires via a solder connection as pictured on the slide. I will cover what materials you will need to perform this task, the steps to accomplish this task, and finally a common mistake beginners make while soldering. Let's say, for example, I accidentally cut a wire that I did not mean to cut. Well, no need to panic. We can easily reconnect this wire by soldering it back together again. Let's start with the list of materials that we will need to perform this task. First, we will need a soldering iron. According to an article titled, "What are the different types of soldering irons?" from soldering.biz retrieved October 24th, 2018, there are two main types of soldering irons, soldering pencils and soldering stations. Displayed is a soldering pencil. This is a more affordable of the two, but tends to heat up slower and is generally less powerful. It will work fine for what we are using it for. Next, we will need solder. This is the metal that we will be melting to connect our wires. According to Oyvind Nydal from BuildElectronicCircuits.com, retrieved October 24th, 2018, solder comes in two varieties, lead-based and lead-free. We will also need wire strippers to strip the rubber coating from the wires. Electrical tape is also needed to wrap the solder joints once made. This will ensure the joint is separated from any other electronics and will not cause a short circuit. A tool aptly named helping hands is useful when you need to hold the wires when you have solder in one hand and the soldering iron in the other. Finally, you will want something to clean your soldering tip. The one displayed on the screen is a relatively fancy solder cleaner with brass mesh to scrape the tip. A white paper towel can also work to clean your soldering iron if need be. Now that we understand the materials needed to solder two wires together, we can begin by first plugging in the soldering iron. Most soldering pencils come with a plug that can be directly plugged into any wall outlet. Some come with temperature dials, and if this is the case for you, try setting it to around 350 degrees Celsius. Be careful though, as soldering irons can be dangerous once fully heated. Make sure that they are away from anything flammable. Typically, stands are provided for soldering irons that allow you to set them down when the iron is not in use. Next, take your two wires and strip the rubber off them. Simply take your wire stripper and close on the wire and pull it apart. I ended up using my fingers to get the wire completely stripped. Take the two wires you just stripped and strip them together like you would twist a bread tie. According to Electric Engineering Community, retrieved October 24th, 2018, this is known as a rat tail joint. Next, use your helping hands tool to hold the wires in place. Before you solder, clean your soldering iron by scraping it along your solder cleaner. Notice how it appears more shiny afterwards. This is good. Next, place a small amount of solder onto the soldering iron tip. After you do this, place it against the bare wires to begin to heat up the wire. Now, you can begin to touch the solder to the bare wires. Eventually, the solder will melt into the metal on its own. This occurs when the wire is fully heated. At this point, you can feed the solder into the joint until it is fully coated, as you can see in this video. Once the joint is fully coated, let it sit for a while and have it cool down. Once cooled, try to pull apart your two wires. If done right, you will not be able to force them apart with your bare hands. Finally, wrap your solder joint with electrical tape to ensure it does not short circuit when in contact with other electronics. This is what the finished product should eventually look like. A common mistake with beginners learning how to solder is dry soldering. This occurs when you touch the solder to the iron directly and dip the solder onto the joint. Here, the solder never infuses with the wire. This creates a much weaker and unreliable joint. In this presentation, we covered the basics of soldering two wires together, including a materials list, a set of procedures, and an example of what not to do. These are just the basics of soldering though. Once skilled enough, you'll be able to fix broken electronics, which could save you sizable amounts of money one day. Happy soldering!